So they come to the tomb, and it seems as though they hadn't thought everything through, because it says in verse 3, they were saying, or they kept on saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?
Something else they would not have done on the Sabbath.
Well, yeah, and this is an obstacle now. The tomb that they're talking about would be a tomb with a large stone that would be rolled in front of it. Jesus was buried in a rich man's tomb. And you might say, well, doesn't one of the Gospels tell us that Joseph rolled the stone? So if Joseph rolled the stone, why couldn't they roll it out of the way? Well, the stone would be a large stone, and the way that they set this up is it would roll down into a kind of a trough or a crevice kind of a thing. And so when it rolled down, it was easy to get it rolling.
Going down a decline.
Going down a decline, right, and get into that low spot. But to get it out of the low spot
would take more than one person.
It was a lot of work, see? So they were saying, you know, who is going to roll away the stone for us? And surprise, verse 4, looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away. It was extremely large.
Now, before we go any further, there's this little mention of a young man at the tomb.
Yes, that comes in the very next statement.
Right.
Entering the tomb, it says they saw a young man.
Who is this guy?
Sitting at the right, wearing a white robe, and they were amazed. Well, we're never told who he is.
You
know.
Too bad.
Too bad. Actually,
I'm sure there's a lot of curious people.
We can figure out who he was by reading this story a little more closely.
Okay, let's do that.
If we come to verse 6, notice what he says. Well, first of all, we see he's inside the tomb. A rather strange place for a young man to be. First, we have the strange thing. The stone was rolled away. They come into this tomb, and there's this young man sitting there. It's not Jesus. He's a young man, and he's sitting on the right side of favor. And he's wearing a white robe. It seems that's good, you know, maybe significant. And then he talks to them. They're amazed. That's another point, an indicator. And he says to them, do not be amazed. You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene who has been crucified. He has risen. He is not here. Behold, here's the place where they laid him. Now, how did he know all this stuff? How did he know they were coming seeking Jesus? How did he know that he wasn't there? And then he goes on in verse 7, go tell his disciples and Peter he's going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. I mean, this fellow seems to know an awful lot of things.
Right. Obviously, he's not a Jew, not a Gentile.
Well,
he's
yeah.
Probably not even completely human.
Probably not human. But the way we know this is there's something we call a theophany. Now, we have a graphic that shows the definition of a theophany.
Okay.
A theophany is the appearance of a heavenly being, or the appearance of God. Okay? And so whenever God appears in the Bible, or an angel appears, there's certain characteristic things that tend to take place. There are 5 characteristics that are very typical of a theophany. We have another graphic that shows the characteristics of a typical theophany. There is a glory of the heavenly being, shows up, and there's some kind of glory that is seen. There's usually human fear. There is then divine comfort that takes place. There is revelation, some kind of revelation, and then some type of human response. Now, in our story here, we have these 5 characteristics all take place in a little bit different way, a little bit veiled, but not to the point where we can't see them. First of all, the appearance of the heavenly being is such that, well, we see this young man with the white robe. You say, well, couldn't he just be a young man? Sure, but we notice that the women are amazed. That's the human fear. Okay. Then there's this issue of divine comfort. And what does the young man say to him? What are his
Don't be amazed. Don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid. Don't be amazed. Okay. That's what they usually say. I mean, you remember the birth of Jesus in Luke chapter 2. The angels appear. It says they're very afraid. And the angel says,
be not afraid.
Fear not. He says, I bring you good news. That was the revelation. Now, the revelation is, he says, Jesus has been raised from the dead. He's not here. He's going ahead of you into Galilee. That's where you'll see him. So that's the revelation that takes place. And then we have some kind of human response. Now, the response that takes place in Mark is fear again. The women run away frightened, scared. And they don't say anything to anybody because they're afraid, you know? So we have all the typical kind of characteristics of a theophany. Now, To me, one of the most beautiful lines in this whole story is the line that the young man has in verse 6. He says, "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who has been crucified. He has risen. He is not here." I remember years ago having the privilege of going to Israel, and there's two different traditional places where Jesus was supposed to have been buried. The actual, probably the scholars feel is the real tomb of Jesus is the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre. But there's a garden tomb that looks very much like a tomb that Jesus would be in. There's a stone on the side. You can walk inside and see the tomb, and there's a space that's not real large where somebody would be laid, and you go in there, and of course it's empty. I remember going to this tomb and looking at it, and I remember turning around to go out the door. And you have to stoop down to go out the door. And I remember stooping, but before I stooped down to go out the door, there was a little sign above the door, and it said, "He is not here. He is not here." What a wonderful, wonderful message that Jesus was not there and is not there. He is risen from the dead. Now, the young man says to the disciples that, these ladies, that they are to go and tell the disciples and Peter.
Why does he signify Peter? Go tell your disciples and Peter.
Yeah.
Why does he do that?
Well, because Peter had denied Jesus 3 times.
Of course, right.
And they would not, he might expect that he didn't belong anymore. So actually, this
little extra bit of comfort.
A comfort, a little bit of grace from Jesus to say, Peter, I want to see you. That story of his meeting is told over in John chapter 21 of that wonderful meeting. Now, we come to this funny ending that they run away and they don't tell anybody because they're afraid.
So if this is the real ending, why would it end?
Why would it end there? Well, it ends there because it's like an unfinished symphony. If you heard the symphony going, it went dun 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 dun, and then it did nothing. It didn't da-da, you know. You could hear somebody at the back of the room stand up and say, "Da-da!" You know, you got to have an ending. Now, that's exactly what Mark meant. He meant for you and I to go out and tell.
Okay.
Somebody didn't tell. Somebody has to tell. It's got to be you. You've got to go and tell the story of Jesus and let them know that he has risen from the dead. This ending is a call to discipleship.
Right.
To go and testify.
And this would probably be a good time to wrap this whole thing up because time has eluded us again.
Yep, we're at the end of the book.
What a great place to end. Go and tell.
Go and tell.
Professor, I can't thank you enough for spending the time with us, sharing what you found in your research.
My privilege. Thank you for letting me be here.
Well, Lord bless you in your ministry.
Thank you. God bless.
And we thank all of you watching Books of the Book. This is not the only book of the Bible, so you make sure that you keep watching because there'll be many more books to be covered. Go and tell. Share the love of the Lord.